Anyone who desires to be ignorant and to be free desires what never was and never will be. Hello, this is Michael Anthony Peruca for Institute on the Constitution, and I would like to quote for you Thomas Jefferson once again. Anyone who desires to be ignorant and to be free desires what never was and never will be. Now that's a pretty little piece of poetry, but it also contains a very solid truth. What Jefferson was saying was that if you don't know the source and nature of law or the source and nature of your rights, then you won't have them. I'm here to introduce our Institute on the Constitution's United States Constitution course, and you're going to have Jake McCauley as your instructor for all 12 lectures. But I'd just like to take a moment to briefly share some thoughts before you embark on this important undertaking. First of all, what we are doing here is not revolutionary, it is restorative. We're not doing anything that is brand new. We are trying to restore a way of thinking about American law and government that is really quite old. And why do we need to do that? Well, we seem to be ignorant about our form of government in America.
What form?
What form of government do we have in the United States?
What form of government do we have in the United States? We have a democracy.
Democracy.
Democracy?
Democracy?
Would I be surprised to find that we don't have a democracy?
Yes, no?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I would be surprised.
I would be very surprised.
So we need to reconnect with our own history and our own heritage, and I think that is what Jefferson was talking about. And because we haven't done this, the result has been we don't have the basic tools we need to do the duty that we have as citizens. Now, you may have come to this study for a variety of reasons. You may have concerns or be dissatisfied about the economy, or about bailouts, or about unconstitutional wars, or perhaps you are concerned about health care, or your property rights, or your right to self-defense. Or you generally may believe that something is broken in America and it needs to be fixed. Well, we intend, through the instruction of this course, with the help of Jake McCauley, to address and help bring answers to all of these critical areas of concern. Can we restore lawful government in America? Well, yes, we believe we can. At Institute on the Constitution, we're very hopeful that we can, and in fact, that is our mission here. We believe that the documents of our founding, which contain the basic principles of American law and government, are still here, and a lot of oral history also remains. And finally, we believe that the time is right to recover this American way of thinking. There are so many people who perhaps, like yourself, are dissatisfied with what they are seeing today. So in this first lecture, it's our hope and our intent for you to understand that there is a specific view of law and government which is distinctively American in nature. We call this the American view, and it's based on a biblical worldview. And this will be the subject of the first lecture, where Jake is going to describe the American view, contrast it with other views, and talk a little bit about what a constitution is and the importance of history. So without further delay, here's your host, Jake McCauley.
Thank you for joining the Institute on the Constitution. We're going to begin with Lecture 1 today, and we're going to speak about the American view of law and government. What is the American view? Well, first we need to bring up the word presuppositions. Now, I realize many folks don't understand presuppositions, as I didn't. It's just a fancy lawyer word, and what it really means is these are things that are accepted as true before an argument can proceed. So in other words, I haven't told any of you, you're in a classroom tonight. You presupposed that, you knew that, you understood that. We all did. And so we didn't have to say that you're taking a class tonight. It's why you showed up. And there were these things, the foundation of our country. Presuppositions, certain things that they all understood to be true and right. One of these things was that there was a God. And by the way, these presuppositions can be found in the Declaration of Independence. There is a God. It says in the Declaration that all men are created equal, signifying there is most definitely a Creator God. That our rights come from Him. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, also found in the Declaration. And that the purpose of government is to protect these God-given rights. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. All civil government is derived through the consent of the people. It says in the Declaration, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Again, these are presuppositions that our founders knew. They're presuppositions that all people who swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution should know. And that whenever any government becomes destructive of this purpose, securing our rights, securing your rights, the people have a right and a duty to alter or abolish it, signifying the government. Spoken more clearly in the Declaration, it says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. It's what our founders did when they cast off the chains of Britain and embraced the Constitution that we have today. The Declaration of Independence gives those presuppositions that all men understood at the beginning of our country, and that all men who truly love liberty and love their God understand. So we need to speak about the relevance of God and His Word to law and government. How is it relevant to both of those sources? Well, number one, we have to presuppose God exists, as we do, and that if He exists, He knows what's happening on earth. He's a big God, He's God, therefore He's omnipotent, and He's omnipresent. He also has a moral conviction about what's happening on earth. In other words, He wasn't a God that came and established everything and then moved away and doesn't care any longer. He communicates those convictions to us. Whenever a father or a mother punishes their child, they communicate to the child why they are being punished. Whenever He blesses a child, there's a communication there. And God does the same thing, and He does that through His Bible, the Holy Word of God. Now, much of the Bible addresses law and government, and that's shocking to some Christians because they think there's a distinction between secular and sacred. In other words, the church has their realm, they stay out of the government has their realm, and many Christians believe that the government is just dirty politics and we shouldn't be involved in that. We just need to win souls. But the Bible speaks very clearly, and as a matter of fact, in further lectures as we discuss these things and we discover more about our founders, we realize that the Bible was a foundation, a cornerstone to establish the documents that we have right now, to receive God's directives as to how we should govern our country. If we ignore what the Bible says about law and government, we're not preaching the whole counsel of God. So we can't just read the parts where it talks about soul winning and miracles and gifts and things like that. We have to speak to the fullness of what the Word of God says. Church leaders throughout history have addressed issues of civil government. Any great religious leader that we speak of, that hangs in the walls of our churches, that have started major denominations throughout this nation, they have spoke to this very topic. People such as Augustine, Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, Rutherford, and our own Pilgrim and Puritan forebears, those that came over in the 1600s. The refusal of many modern Christians to address this issue of law and government is a modern heresy, which appears to be drawing to a close as more. It's proof of it right now. It's evidence that you're here right now to learn these things. Many pastors throughout the country are teaching our courses of instruction on how we apply the biblical view of government. Now, we've talked about those presuppositions. I'd like to move on to the functions of civil government, and you can see that highlighted in 3 points. Number one, to restrain the exercise of sin. We find in Romans 13, verses 3 through 4, that God has ordained government as His minister. That word minister, translated, is equal to a minister of the gospel, a preacher who's in the pulpit every Sunday. Well, how does he act as a minister? His duty is to enforce God's standard of right and wrong. It says in the Bible, He bears not the sword in vain, to execute wrath, it says in Romans, against those that do wickedness or lawlessness. They administer the justice system. And why is that? Well, number 3, to maintain the order in a society so that Christians and others can practice right living. We find in 1 Timothy where that is laid out clearly. We don't have civil government so that we can do what we want to do. We have civil government there to protect the rights of those that are doing right. Now that we've established what the American view of law and government is, I won't be so foolish as to deny that there aren't other views of government in the world right now or in play. For example, we have communism. We have Marxism, we have socialism. All these views are in play, and we have summarized those in comparing them to the American view, which is a biblical view of government, to a pagan view of government. The pagan view of government, you'll find all these isms because the state is divine. There is no acceptance or acknowledging of a God. And if they are divine, of course, who can challenge their authority? Their authority is unlimited. And that will lead to state worship. Examples in the Bible are all over. In the Old Testament, when Moses confronted Pharaoh, Pharaoh was known as a god. Nebuchadnezzar, he was known as a god, and you had to worship his statue or his very being. Caesar, many early Christians were persecuted because they wouldn't pinch incense to Caesar, who was also called a god. Well, this is going to result in tyranny, and it is based on evolution. The separation of classes. Some classes have evolved to become a ruling class, and that ruling class is the one who rules and demands obeisance as a deity. There's also a biblical view of government, and that is the American view of government. Simply stated, the state is divinely ordained. Remember Romans 13, God established the government as his minister. Well, he also limited that authority, and Christ did that in the New Testament when he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. In other words, my Father has established and ordained that jurisdiction. But he said to render unto God what is God's. He limited that jurisdiction by stating that God has a jurisdiction outside of Caesar. Well, that's going to lead to patriotism. Many of you would support our veterans, no doubt, because of their willingness to defend us with their lives. Well, that is the purpose of civil government, and that causes people to become patriotic and to love their government if it does its function. This results in a republic where the law rules and everybody is subjugated to that, not just the people, but its leaders as well. Of course, it's based on creation. All men are created equal. There's no distinction between men in government and men in commerce. All men are created equal. As a result, from moving from this biblical view of government now to the pagan view of government, which is in play in the United States, we see unrest, we see dissension, we see lawlessness. An example, we have unconstitutional wars that are carried out for decades. We have lawlessness in our cities. We have an over-bloated welfare system. And not to mention, we have murdered over 50 million of our unborn children in the United States of America. How did we get to this point where we've shifted from the biblical view to the pagan view? Well, there have been a number of historical factors that have contributed to this. First, there's been a revolution in American thought. American institutions now teach anti-American values and ideas, of which we'll talk more as our study continues. Secondly, this false understanding of separation of church and state, which is probably the greatest lie perpetrated upon the American people. And I encourage you to get the DVD Up Against the Wall by Michael Anthony Peruca, and he'll get you to properly understand what this separation of church and state truly means. What is the correct way of thinking? Next, you have the Supreme Court, who through cases like Engel versus Vitale has been constantly working against that biblical American view of law and government. And lastly, many attribute this failure to churches now becoming 501c3 corporations of the state. They put the state in authority over the church, so that now the state becomes the watchdog of what the pulpits say. You can learn more about this by watching our senior instructor, David Whitney, who is a pastor, and his video, Why Churches Should Not Become 501c3s. So now we need to discuss the basic principles of law. In the Old Testament, we find the word Torah used in the Hebrew, and this meant to direct, to point out, to lead. In the New Testament, we find the Greek word nomos, which is a commandment or assignment from a higher authority. So we find, or we could summarize, that law is, number one, a rule of conduct, and it is backed by force, not just custom. It's not just customary to follow the law. You have to. And this is based on a higher moral authority. Now, William Blackstone identified three forms of law in his commentaries on the common law of England. The first is the laws of nature. These can be revealed by God through human reason and intellect. And your conscience, you can find that in the book of Romans in chapter 2. Secondly, you have the revealed law, since we can't identify everything we need to know about law by looking at nature, because nature is fallen. God has revealed that to us in a very practical way, and that's His Bible. Now lastly is human-made law, which we call municipal law. This is man-made, and it's enacted by civil government, but it is valid only if it squares with the laws of nature and nature's God. In other words, it cannot be suffered to contradict the two divine laws, said William Blackstone. Now, what we just discussed, I understand, may seem revolutionary, but it's not. It's actually very old. This is restorative thinking, to go back to what we were founded upon, the Constitution. Now, what is a constitution? Well, Black's Law Dictionary describes it as the organic and fundamental law of a nation or a state, which may be written or unwritten. So remember, every organization has a constitution that can be written or unwritten, but this is more of a general or basic understanding of the law. Statutory laws is where it's going to become more specific, but that statutory law has to point back to that constitution for its reference or its enforcement power. The nature of the United States Constitution is it's a document of omission. In other words, it limits the government. It does not limit the people or our liberties. This is a delegated power, express powers document. The 10th Amendment acts as the stop sign that says whatever we tell government it can do, that is what is authorized to do. It can do no other. As we conclude Lecture 1, I'd like to discuss the role of history in America and how important it is. Now, many people understand history as just a series of dates and times and events that occurred sometime in the past. They don't understand how it affects me today. Why should I care about this? I memorize it because I have to pass a test, but then I forget it all. I was once like that as well, but now I understand the relevance of what history is and how important it is for me to understand history, to be able to live in liberty and to maintain liberty. Imagine, if you would, for me for a second, a mall directory. You walk into a mall one day and you're looking to buy some new gym shorts or shoes or something like that. And you go to the directory to find the store. Now you see the red dot on your map, and that red dot says you are here. Imagine with me for a moment if there is nothing else on that map except for that red dot. And that's what we're like as we travel through time right now, as we live our lives, and we don't pay attention to history. See, history fills in the details for us. It shows us, here's the mall. These are the dimensions of the mall. These are the stores. These are the restrooms. And now, where you're at makes sense. See, we didn't just randomly pop up here through an evolutionary process of slime and ooze and, well, the survival of the fittest. That's not how it happened. History can literally teach us a number of different things. It can show us God's providential hand into bringing governments and systems and greatness and people. This is how we learn to understand what is good, what is right, and how it survives throughout times past. History shows God's sovereign plan for the United States. You can see, literally, religious persecution drove our founders here. You can see the good that we did and how it developed. You can see the evils that have been established in this country and how they've been overcome by many good people that were Christian men, relying, firm reliance upon divine providence, as our founders did. You can learn about our founders and how they firmly relied upon divine providence in every area. When Washington, his army was ragtag, it was sick, it was hungry, it was starving, they didn't have boots, yet they were able to divinely cross a river in fog and be saved from the pursuing British. You'll find how at a particular time in that war for independence, when the Battle of Trenton happened, and we totally took by surprise the Hessian troops, providence was Washington's reliance. We can learn that through history. We can get excited about that. They become our heroes, and they get the respect that they ought to have when we understand them through a historical lens. I want to talk about 3 other reasons that are very important. Maybe you don't understand history. Maybe you don't care about history. You don't care about reading about our founders and all the wonderful exploits that they did and how we received our Constitution. But you better understand history for these 3 reasons. It helps you understand the intent of those that gave us our Constitution. See, words can be manipulated. Judges can change through precedent and through case law. They can change the meaning of the very words in the Constitution. Where up can mean down, and down can mean up, and left can mean right, and black can mean white. That can happen over an evolutionary process of people that don't know their history. We can, through history, study the intent of our founders and understand exactly why they gave us the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. And then we can apply it to this day and age, today. History also teaches us how the Constitution has been interpreted. So if the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, has been eroded, we can find out exactly when and how that started, and how people have successfully continued to erode it. And then we can look to our founders and establish a simple precedent that we don't have to argue or debate about because we understand history. And we can say, this is the law. This is why it's the law, and it will not change, and it cannot change. History alerts us to the dangers facing our constitutional republic today. If we don't understand, from a historical context, the Constitution that was given to us, we are not going to survive under the current limitations, actually usurpations, of the Constitution that men proclaim these days. Ask many elected representatives, what is the First Amendment? What are the 5 liberties guaranteed me to the First Amendment? They can't answer you. So if they don't even know what it is because they haven't studied history, how much more are you going to be duped by what's given to you by legislation and by government today? That's the importance of history. That's why we must study history. And you're going to study a lot of history in this class. We look forward to that, and we look forward to learning and living liberty with each one of you. Thank you so much.